Confession of a mob heir who became an FBI informant. New York, Miami, Palermo. 2009 to 2018. There are things a father says to his son once and never repeats. Not because he forgets, because he knows that if he said it right, once is enough. My father said one such thing to me when I was 14 years old. We were standing at the window of his study in the house in Howard Beach, looking out at the street. He put his hand on my shoulder and said quietly, without drama, "The way you speak about something long settled, Dominic, family is everything. Family is more important than money. Family is more important than life itself. A man who betrays his family stops being a man." I remembered that forever. I believed it for 20 years. I lived by that principle, breathed it, made every decision based on it, and then I betrayed my family. I betrayed my father, my uncles, my cousins. I betrayed people I had known since birth. People who taught me to walk and talk and understand how the world works. People who were there at every birthday, every Sunday dinner, every funeral. I did it consciously, methodically, without hesitation at the last moment, and I did it for my son. If my father was right, that family is more important than everything, then I was right too. We just understood the word family differently. My name is Dominic. I won't give you the last name, it's still too alive. Too recognizable to those who don't need to know it. What I will tell you is this: that name in New York opened certain doors and closed others. It meant belonging. It meant protection. It meant history, not pretty history, but real history, with roots going back to Sicilian villages and New York docks at the turn of the 20th century, to men who came here with nothing and built something, even if it wasn't something you could be proud of in daylight. I was the oldest son. That determined everything. In Italian-American families of our type, the oldest son isn't just a child, he's a project. You invest in him differently, you explain things to him differently, you expect things from him differently. From childhood I understood that my life didn't belong only to me. That there was a structure, older than me, bigger than me, and I was its continuation, its future. My father, I'll call him Salvatore, that's not his real name, was what our world called a capo. Not the very top of the hierarchy, but high enough that his word carried weight. Smart, controlled, never raised his voice, he considered volume a sign of weakness. He spoke quietly and waited to be heard. He was always heard. I loved him. That's important to say directly, because what comes next may make that love seem impossible to understand. But it was real. He was my father, not just biologically, but in the sense that can't be captured in words. He taught me to think. To read people, to understand situations. He gave me time that busy men rarely give their children. We talked for hours, about life, about history, sometimes about Sicily, which he had only seen once, as a boy, but which he spoke of like a lost paradise. I grew up. I entered the family business, gradually, the way it's supposed to happen. First the periphery, helping with the legitimate enterprises that served as cover. Restaurants, construction, a trucking company. Real businesses that operated and made money. It's just that alongside them existed something else, something that wasn't discussed out loud in restaurants with strangers. By 30 I knew enough. Not everything. In families like ours nobody knows everything. That's a security principle. But my part, I knew it well. Financial flows, relationships, who owed what to whom, where the interests lay. My father was grooming me as his successor. He never said it directly, but I understood. Dominic would carry this forward. That's how it was arranged. At 32, my son was born. Luca, that changed something inside me, not immediately, not sharply, gradually. You know how it happens, you look at your child, and the world around you slowly rearranges itself. Not collapses, rearranges. Things that seemed important stay in their places but shift in meaning. Things you never thought about suddenly move to the center. I started thinking about the future differently. About what kind of man Luca would become. About what world he would live in. About what I wanted for him, and what I didn't want. I didn't want for him what I was. That's the first honest admission I made to myself, quietly, alone, without words. I didn't want my son to grow up with the weight I had grown up with. I didn't want his life to belong to a structure he had never chosen, but this was my quiet internal contradiction, which I kept to myself. Life continued: work, family, obligations. Luca grew. Everything moved as it moved, until the day that changed everything. Luca was 6 years old. Fall of 2015. I was at a meeting, business, nothing special, discussing a construction contract. After the meeting, I stayed to talk with a man named Jimmy. Jimmy was old, around 65, the kind of man who knows everything about everyone while somehow managing to stay in the shadows. He was close to my father, they'd been friends for 30 years. Jimmy told me something. Not as a warning, not with any particular intent, just in conversation, the way you mention something long since settled. He brought up the name of a federal agent who was running surveillance on our family. And he added that this agent, by all accounts, had developed an interest in the people around the family. Including the children of the oldest son. I showed no reaction. I smiled, said something neutral, said goodbye. Got in my car, drove home and thought, the children of the oldest son. That was Luca. One child. My son, who was 6 years old and loved dinosaurs and still couldn't tie his shoes without help. What did this mean in practice? That the federal investigation was studying the family's circle. That at some point, near or far, there could be searches, warrants, questions. That Luca could find himself in a situation I couldn't control, that was one thing. That I could accept as part of the risks, unpleasant, but manageable. But 2 weeks after that conversation with Jimmy, I learned something else entirely, completely by accident. I walked into my father's study to pick up a document. He said he'd left it on the desk. The study was empty. I picked up the document and was about to leave when I noticed an open notebook on the edge of the desk. I wasn't planning to read it. My eye just caught it, a few lines. Names. Numbers. And one line that I read and reread 3 times, standing in that empty room, Luca's name. Next to it, the name of a man I knew as one of the federal prosecutors actively working against our family. And beside that, a word in Sicilian dialect whose meaning I knew well. That word meant use. My father was considering using my son as leverage, as cover, as a tool in the game with federal prosecutors. The specific scheme, I didn't know it in full, only this fragment. But this fragment was enough. I put the document back in its place. Left the study. Drove home, walked into Luca's room. He was asleep. I sat on the edge of his bed and looked at him for a long time. At his eyelashes. At the way his hand lay under his cheek. At the way he breathed, evenly, deeply, trusting the world completely, the way only children do. He didn't know his name was written in his grandfather's notebook. He didn't know anything about the world that surrounded him. He knew only dinosaurs and cartoons and that mom made the best pasta in the world and dad always came to kiss him goodnight. I sat there and thought about one thing: what am I going to do? Talk to my father? Tell him, don't touch Luca, find another way? I knew how that would end. Salvatore would listen. He would say something reassuring. And then he would continue doing what he had decided to do. Because in his value system the family business ranked above the safety of any specific grandchild. That sounds monstrous, but it was his logic, and he had never hidden it. The structure matters more than the individuals, because individuals come and go, but the structure remains. Leave the family? Take Luca, take my wife, disappear? Where? How? Families like ours don't let people go. Especially oldest sons. Especially those who know what I knew. One path remained. The one no one says out loud. The one whose very name in our world is synonymous with death, the FBI. I sat at the edge of my sleeping son's bed and thought about what I was about to do. Betray my father. Betray everything I had been taught. Become what our world calls by a name worse than any insult. And then I thought, he wrote my son's name in a notebook next to the word use. He betrayed first. Just in a different way. I stood up. Straightened the blanket over Luca. Walked out of the room, The next morning I started thinking about how to reach the FBI without anyone finding out. This turned out to be harder than I expected. In our world, federal agents are enemies by definition. Contact with them is suicide if anyone finds out. I couldn't call a hotline. I couldn't walk into an office. I couldn't write a letter with a return address. I needed a go-between. Someone on the outside, connected to neither our family nor federal structures directly. There was one person. A lawyer, not the family lawyer, but my personal attorney, hired a few years earlier for a corporate matter unrelated to family business. His name was Paul. A good lawyer, expensive, with a reputation for knowing how to keep quiet. Most importantly, he wasn't part of our system. He worked in corporate law, with clean clients, and our connection was the only one the family didn't know about. I called Paul. Asked to meet. In person, not over the phone. We met at his office in Manhattan. I closed the door, sat down, and said, "Paul, I need your help. What I'm going to ask goes beyond normal practice. But it's legal. And it concerns the safety of my child." He looked at me. Said nothing. I said, "I need to make contact with the FBI. Directly. In a way that nobody finds out." A long pause. "Dominic," he said finally. "Do you understand what you're saying?" "I understand. And you understand that if this becomes known?" "I understand." Another pause. Then he stood up, walked to the window, stood there. Came back. Sat down. "Why?" I answered with one word, "Luca." He nodded. Asked nothing more. 3 days later he gave me a name and a way to make contact. A special agent of the FBI, I'll call him Connor, that's not his real name. Specialization, organized crime, New York field office. Reputation, hard, professional, keeps his word. That last part mattered most. Keeps his word. The first meeting with Connor was in a small office on a street I had never noticed before, despite living in New York my whole life. He came alone. I came alone. We sat across a plain table and looked at each other. The first thing he said, "I know who you are. I know your family. You don't need to explain the basics to me." The first thing I said, "I need guarantees for my son. Not for myself. For him. That's the only condition." He looked at me. For a long time. With the professional assessment of a man used to reading people quickly and accurately. "What exactly do you want?" he asked. I explained. Luca had to be removed from any risk connected to this case. His name could not appear anywhere. If it came to relocation, we relocate the right way, with full cover. Witness protection, for him and his mother, regardless of what happened to me. Connor listened. Then said, "That's possible. But it's not free." "I don't mean money, I understand. Information, all of it. Not pieces, everything you know." I thought for a second. 1 second, because I'd been thinking about this for days already, and the answer was ready. "Everything," I said. We shook hands. Two men at a plain table in a nameless office who had just agreed on something that would change many lives. No drama, no ceremony. Just a handshake. What followed was 18 months. 18 months of double life, the most exhausting experience I can imagine. On the outside, everything is before. Work. Family gatherings. Sunday dinners at my parents' house. My mother cooked, everyone came, people talked, laughed. I sat at that table and looked at my father and thought about what I was doing. Sometimes he looked at me and smiled. I smiled back. It was unbearable. And necessary. Underneath, methodical work. I passed along to Connor what I knew. Financial structures, which I understood better than anyone in the family. That was my part of the operation. Routes, accounts, the architecture of shell companies. Names and relationships, who was connected to whom in our world. It's a complex web that an outsider spends years trying to untangle, and I had known it since childhood. I couldn't always hand over documents, too risky. But I had memory. Good memory, trained throughout my life, because in our world you can't always write things down. I memorized. Then reproduced. Connor recorded, "The hardest part wasn't what I was doing. The hardest part was one thought that came at 3 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. What if they already know? What if someone saw me with Paul? What if Jimmy, who knows everything about everyone, had already told my father? What if one of Connor's people was compromised and information had leaked?" In our world, thoughts like these aren't paranoia. They're reasonable caution. People disappeared for less. I kept going. Because every time the fear became unbearable, I went to Luca's room. Looked at him. He was growing, 7 years old, then 8. Learning to read. Drawing dinosaurs. One time his drawing showed me a giant stick figure with antenna arms and the word Daddy written underneath. I kept that drawing. It's still with me. The breaking point came about a year into the cooperation. My father called me in. "Just, Dominic. We need to talk." In our world, those words always make your stomach drop. I came. He sat in the study, the same one where I had seen the notebook with Luca's name. He talked for a long time. About the family, about continuity, about how times were changing and adjustments had to be made. Then he said something specific. He said he had a plan. That federal pressure was mounting and measures needed to be taken. That some of those measures involved certain people in the family's orbit, people who could become a problem if the investigation reached them. That this problem needed to be resolved. He named several names, one of them I knew. A man who had worked on the periphery of our structure for a long time. Older, sick. A man who was a threat to no one. He simply knew too much. Resolved, I sat there and listened to my father. Looked at his face, calm as always, no anger, just a man working through a management problem. He was talking about killing a human being the same way he might talk about replacing a business partner. I said, "Understood. Give me a few days." He nodded. Said nothing more. That same evening I met with Connor. For the first time in all of this, I wasn't just transferring information. I said, "We need to move now. There's a man in immediate danger." "Specific danger," Connor nodded. Asked for details. I gave him everything I had. The operation began 3 days later. It was coordinated, multiple locations simultaneously, multiple warrants. Wednesday morning. I was home with Luca. He was having breakfast, eating cereal, watching something on his tablet. My phone rang. My brother's number. I picked up. My brother was talking very fast, his voice unrecognizable. He said they'd come. That they were everywhere. That Dad was. I said, "I know." I hung up. Looked at Luca. He lifted his head from the tablet and looked at me. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Yeah, buddy. Everything's fine. Eat your breakfast." He lowered his head. Went back to his cereal. An hour later Connor arrived with colleagues. We already knew what would happen next. My wife knew. We had talked the night before. A long conversation, a hard one. She cried. Then stopped. Then said, "Luca is what matters." I said, "Yes." We held each other and sat like that for a long time without speaking. For Luca we framed it as moving. A new city, a new school, new friends. He was 8 years old. He asked, "Are my dinosaurs coming with us?" He meant the collection of plastic dinosaurs he'd been building for 3 years. I said, "Every single one." He said, "Then it's fine." 8 years old. The whole world fits into whether the dinosaurs are coming. My father was arrested that morning. He didn't resist. Salvatore never lost his composure. I can say that truthfully. They say he came out to meet the agents calmly. Asked to get his jacket, buttoned it, and walked out. Like a man who knows the rules of the game. I haven't seen him since that day. I don't know if I ever will. I don't even know if I want to. The legal process was long. Several years, testimony, appeals, related cases spinning off in every direction. I testified behind closed doors. Multiple times. I said everything I knew. Connor sat next to me at every session. The sentences came down in 2018. My father received 22 years. Others got various terms. The structure built over decades was substantially dismantled. We live now in a city I won't name. Under different names. Luca goes to a regular school, a good one. With normal kids, with teachers who know nothing about where he came from. He's moved on from just dinosaurs, now it's also soccer and some video game I don't understand but pretend to be interested in. He's 13. He's starting to understand that the world is more complicated than it seemed at 8. He asks questions, careful ones, as if he senses that some of the answers are heavy. I answer honestly, not everything, not all at once, age by age. When he's grown, I'll tell him everything. He has the right to know. He has the right to understand why we live the way we live and what came before it. I think about my father. Not every day, but I think about him. About who he was. About what he gave me, not just the burden and the system, but the ability to think, the ability to read people, the ability to hold yourself together when everything is falling apart. That's his. That stays with me, and I think about that notebook. About the line with Luca's name and the word use. I understand now, maybe it was just a note. Maybe I misread it. Maybe he never intended to do what I feared, maybe, but I couldn't gamble on maybe. I couldn't say maybe to myself and live with it while Luca grew up beside me. Some risks cannot be accepted. Especially when it's a child who eats cereal and watches his tablet and knows absolutely nothing. My father said, family is more important than everything. He was right, we just understood family differently. For him, the structure. The history. The code. Obligations older than both of us. For me, a boy with a collection of dinosaurs, I chose the boy, and if I had to choose again, I'd choose the same way, every single time. Names have been changed. Details have been deliberately altered. This story is based on the documented real-world practice of recruiting informants from within organized crime families, as detailed in FBI and U.S. Department of Justice materials. The Federal Witness Security Program, WITSEC, described in this story has operated since 1970. In that time more than 18,000 people have gone through it, along with their families, under new names, in new cities. Every one of them made a choice. Not always the right one. Not always with a good ending. But a choice, sometimes that's all any of us have.